Let's turn now to an American history teacher who is discussing the Vietnam War with his students. As you watch this segment, ask yourself how this teacher's philosophy compares to that of the teacher in the first segment.
Okay, we're going to pick up today with the Vietnam War, which we talked about yesterday a little bit, the beginnings of it. The first thing we need to talk about is why all of this happened and go right back to the very beginning. This area that we're talking about, Southeast Asia, had been conquered by the French as early as the 1880s and was set up as a colony.
The teacher briefly discusses colonization and the Japanese occupation of Indochina during World War II. And then he turns to the fall of the French at the Vietnamese city of Dien Bien Phu in 1954.
In 1954, the military situation had gotten so bad for the French that they controlled only the cities. And one city in particular, and I'd like for you to label this on your map, number 6, little city of Dien Bien Phu. I've got it written up there on the board so you can spell it. Dien Bien Phu, little city located right in this area of Vietnam. French had several thousand of their elite French Foreign Legion troops in that city, and they were surrounded by the Viet Cong, or the Viet Minh. In 1954, in the summer, the French, after holding out for months, surrendered the city of Dien Bien Phu to the Viet Minh. And the very next day, a peace talk started in Geneva, Switzerland. And that's when we moved down here to be the Geneva Accords. And the plan involved basically 4 things. And I've got these numbered 1 through 4 under Geneva Accords. The first thing, Vietnam was to be split into 2 pieces. And you can label this on your map. The split occurred just about here. You can find this big peninsula that sticks out. It's just a little bit south of that. That area would be demilitarized. Free elections, not under the control of any one power. 1956. Those elections were never held. South Vietnam refused to hold the elections. No Dinh Diem, 1956, when it came time for the elections, said there will be no elections in South Vietnam. You can vote in the North if you want. We will not vote in the South. I am in control in the South. He refused. President Eisenhower in the United States went along with him. Eisenhower was even quoted as saying, if there are elections held today, Ho Chi Minh will win 80% of the vote. So here we are, the United States, holding a position that is not too familiar with us. Aren't we the people who are in favor of free elections for everybody and letting the people decide what route they want to take as far as the government? This maybe gives you a little bit of an idea of how paranoid everybody in the world was about the threat of communism. Anything to stop communism from happening. And we came up with a theory to explain this problem. And that theory is called the domino theory. And this is number 1, number A under the American involvement. Did I lose you there? Okay, you're looking a little puzzled, Kim. The domino theory was a theory proposed by the Secretary of State for Eisenhower. Same man who came up with the idea of massive retaliation. Remember who he was? Airport in Washington's named for it. John Foster Dulles, exactly. John Foster Dulles had been actually pushing the United States to use nuclear weapons to help the French in South Vietnam while the French were still there. As soon as the French went out, Dulles became really the spokesman for American policy, and he propounded a theory called the domino theory. Dulles built his whole theory of international relations with the United States versus the communists on the idea of a little game of building up dominoes and pushing them over. You push over the first domino, and it hits the second domino, which hits the third, etc., etc. He said the first domino is North Vietnam. The second domino is South Vietnam. Then Cambodia, then Laos, then Thailand, then Burma, then India. And what he said, we've already lost this first domino. It's going to tip over and hit South Vietnam. When South Vietnam falls, it's going to tip over and hit Cambodia. When it falls, it's going to hit Laos, and so forth and so on. What's the only way to stop this from happening? Well, you can take out a domino, of course, to break it up, but what else? Well, yeah, exactly. Or build a wall right here. One thing I really kind of halfway intended to start with, and I'm glad I didn't. I have a quote from a very famous man in American history that we need to think about and try to relate. We are not about to send American boys 8,000 or 9,000 miles away from home to fight a war that someone else should be fighting for themselves. Does that sound familiar? Remember somebody saying that we've talked about? Who's that? Roosevelt, exactly. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That was said when? What was the United States position in the world at that time? Trying to stay out of?
World War II.
Exactly. Trying to stay out of World War II, and he was in the election, and he said, we're not going to let American boys go over across that sea and fight a war for those Europeans. Well, in 1964, Lyndon Johnson stated what I just read to you. We are not about to let American boys go 8,000 or 9,000 miles from home to fight a war Asian boys should be fighting. What do you suppose happened right after he got elected? We sent our boys 8,000 or 9,000 miles to fight a war that Asian boys should have been fighting. And that's what we're really going to be talking about throughout this war. The war that had been a French war and led to French defeat. The war that we took over from the French with the idea of stopping the fall of the dominoes soon was eating up American lives at the rate of 12,000 to 15,000 people per year. The situation went from this little simple plan to stop the dominoes from falling to a loss of 53,000 American lives that we know of. Several people still missing that we don't know where they are, if they're alive, if they'll ever come out. And we'll pick up really with the main actions of the war starting tomorrow or next.